Hello and welcome to this episode of Tech Talks with Matt. As you may know by now, I'm Matt, who does these Tech Talks, and I'm delighted for this episode to be joined by Stefanos and Konstantinos from Syntax. Welcome to you both.
Hello.
Welcome, Matt.
Thank you very much for joining us. This series works because we get to talk to people like you who give really insightful information, and really the premise of the whole series of these episodes is what keeps CIOs awake at night, and that's the areas that we're addressing. So really what we're sort of framing in this one is COBOL modernization. What is that journey that people go through? But first, I guess for the people who are listening and seeing this for the first time, who are Syntax?
Mm-hmm. So Syntax is a group of companies. We have our headquarters in Athens, Greece, and we have currently two subsidiary companies in the what we call GCC countries. One is in Kuwait and the other one is in Qatar. And we are providing software technology services and consulting for over 35 years. Now, for 27 years, we have been helping organizations of all sizes modernize their mainframes with the use of the micro-focus solutions powered by COBOL. And, this has been a long-lasting journey. Micro-focus is one of our most long-standing partners, and we have together been able to enable enterprises to implement this, what we believe is a cutting-edge information technology offering, as per the best business practices that can help organizations innovate, modernize their applications, and move business forward.
And so do you work across industries, any particular sectors that you focus on?
So yeah, traditionally, this is an area that goes across enterprises. It is more targeted to large enterprises that have a substantial investment in COBOL and legacy technologies. This mostly will consist of traditionally banking. For sure, it's going to be government. We have come across many ministries and many government entities that still rely heavily on COBOL. And also we still have certain customers in the energy and telco sector.
Okay, so quite, yeah, I mean, and that's quite similar, I think, across the world where we see COBOL running sort of mainframe infrastructure. So why COBOL though, as an organization? Why focus in that area?
Well, actually, this is, as discussed, we have a long-lasting relationship with Micro Focus. This partnership was established back in 1994. And at that time, COBOL was, a very significant player in the business world. So most of the companies at that time relied heavily on COBOL. But we had identified at the time, and we continue to do so, that it was and is a technology that has many years ahead. So because towards the end of the 90s, early 2000, everyone was saying that COBOL is going to go away forever. No one will be using COBOL in the next 5 to 6 years. So having understood the modernization journey that Micro Focus offers, we had identified that there is an opportunity here for the companies to keep the best out of the existing COBOL development that they had done. Also bridge the gap and keep up to date with the modern technologies and looking at the future. So we have Micro Focus can fill that gap, and we had invested on this heavily by putting more people into the team that does the pre-sales, that does the implementation, that does the post-life support, and we created a specialized business unit for this technology. which has bode for us very well because we have undertook some very important projects during these years. And this is something that in 2022 is still going on. And now we're discussing about modernizing COBOL applications that will help customers move to the cloud. So it's pretty much alive and kicking.
Yeah, Stefanos, it's really interesting to hear you say that, because COBOL often gets called legacy technology, and it often gets sort of positioned as something old, which it is. But that doesn't mean it's still not the best way to do things, which is a really interesting point. I don't know, Konstantinos, in your role, are you seeing? So you're seeing continued demand? I mean, you're not seeing COBOL, the use of COBOL reducing in what you see?
Well, being a developer and starting my career as a developer, I would love to see the COBOL, being reduced. But the truth is that it won't, because we already know, everyone knows that heavy industries rely on COBOL, and all those mainframe systems are heavily integrated with COBOL. And for many, many years, back in the 60s or 50s, I can't even remember, big companies and industries were investing in COBOL. So they have huge, enormous code bases that their market relies on that. So this cannot be, diminished or disappear in the next years. So I'm sure that it won't disappear, and I might be a bit optimistic here, and I will say that it will evolve. I mean, I've seen it myself evolve.
Okay, yeah, no, I think yeah, we certainly see that from our side as well. So when you work with your customers, I'm interested, and I think our listeners and viewers will be interested to hear how you work with an organization. So if I was a large bank and I knew that I needed to modernize my COBOL mainframe, COBOL-based mainframe, how would I work with you? How can you give us an example of how you work?
Stefanos, can you take the lead on that?
Sorry, I have a problem with my echo. Give me 1 second.
That's okay.
Okay.
Very sorry. Can you please repeat that last question? Because
yeah, absolutely. And as I said, we can cut this together. So we'll just take a brief pause. So when you're working with your customers, I'm imagining I'm a large bank and I have a extensive COBOL mainframe. How do you work with your customers on that modernization journey? Just on a high level. I mean, what's your approach?
So it all comes down with starting to do an assessment of the existing environment, right? So we need to understand how the current COBOL implementation, what are the existing applications it supports, what is the business functionality of these applications, and what are they saving? To give you an example, we fairly recently undertook a modernization journey in one big bank in Kuwait. And the first step into the discussion was to do an assessment of the existing environment, understanding what applications are running in COBOL, what is the business use of these applications. So we figured out that these applications serve loans, okay, and what is the duration of these loans? How long will you be keeping this application? Will you require this application? Another application was used for the credit cards, which is also one of the more core business apps that the bank would have. So we start with doing an assessment. Under this assessment, this is done via a questionnaire and via getting some important information from the customer. We then do an analysis of the existing environment. What is the applications that we are deemed critical and need to be given a priority? And then following this assessment, we provide the customer with a proposed project plan, which includes, it's more of a business case and project plan, to be frank, which includes the transition of the modernization journey, how long it will take, what are going to be the deliverables, and what would be the associated ROI from doing such an activity. Meaning that when you switch off your existing mainframe, or when you decommission, or when you remove the applications from the mainframe to a distributed platform of the customer's choosing, what would be the end result and the end ROI in the next 5 years.
Do you find when you do, I'm interested in that sort of assessment phase. So do you find often when you do the assessment phase that actually you are informing your customers of bits of stuff they weren't even aware of, or that they're not necessarily using today? Or do your customers tend to know what they've got?
Yeah, totally.
That always happens.
Yeah.
That always happens. I mean, remember that these are applications that have been developed through the years. In actuality, most of the time, most of the people that have developed those are no longer around. So there is a lot, there is a great chunk of, programs that are not actually utilized anymore and are not required. So it's different starting, getting the initial information from the customer, saying, I have this number of programs, a much smaller number. That's why the assessment is the key, and it's the most important factor, starting, understanding what's going to be the actual project.
Yeah, no, I can imagine. These things, as you say, have been built over many, many years by many people who have retired and left, and and nobody touches these things, do they, lightly, just in case, something falls over.
Yeah, it's crazy. I mean, most of the customers, now have one, maximum two people that are still knowledgeable in COBOL, and they tend to do only maintenance and do minimum involvement in order not to disturb things, because they might end up having a situation where you don't have enough people to manage or do heavy weightlifting or do heavy jobs in an existing environment. Which is
a slightly counterintuitive, isn't it? That they've got such a critical part of a business, and maybe because it's not front of mind, it's not the shiny new app or something, that maybe it's not always focused on in the way it needs to be.
Yes, and also there's a scarcity of resources. I mean, you can't easily find any more people that know COBOL and have experience in it, and this poses a very significant business for these companies.
And why is that, Konstantinos? Is it just it doesn't get taught in colleges anymore, or people just aren't interested? What's happened?
Well, obviously, I don't know any college that has any COBOL course in it nowadays. But I have myself a quite interesting story to share with you, Matt. So when I graduated from university as a computer engineer, software engineer, I was familiar with all those modern IDEs and development environments, AI powered and nice colors, syntax highlighting, things like that. I became familiar with terms like the cloud that 10 or 15 years ago was emerging, it was starting, serverless technologies and all those things. So I was really hyped about all these things, as most of the students coming out of software engineering university are. And after a few jobs that I had, my first jobs, I was lucky enough to be hired by a bank, a major bank here in Greece. And I was placed in a team, one of the core teams in the bank that was developing using COBOL. So, of course, I didn't know anything about COBOL. So I started watching all those black screens with some green ugly characters like you'd see in the 80s.
Yeah.
You couldn't even move around the environment. You needed to memorize keyboard shortcuts, how to write code and go back and things like that. And it was a bit of a challenge for me. I mean, COBOL itself is not that difficult. Actually, it's not difficult at all to learn and be familiar and experienced with it, because it's a very basic and business-oriented language, actually. So that wasn't the struggle, but the environment and compilation issues and all those things that were heavily coupled with the mainframe these were the actual challenges. So I was lucky enough to be one of the first developers back then in the team within the bank that we were introduced to the microfocus suite that the bank has just acquired. So all out of a sudden, microfocus came in the picture, and Visual COBOL, and the two worlds actually combined, and you could start working with COBOL and all the application and the environments, the databases, etc., through those IDEs. So that was something phenomenal.
Has that made a big difference then?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. I mean,
it's interesting.
Yeah.
Sorry, I was just going to say it's interesting how you were obviously a coder, a developer, but you were dropped into a place with the language that you didn't know, and so you learned on the job, I guess.
Exactly.
And yeah, Visual COBOL, which now is still relatively newish and still being developed, but seems pretty straight. I mean, it's very straightforward. I've seen people join the microfocus team, students, sort of graduates who within a week have been sort of writing their own code with Visual COBOL. So thanks for that, Konstantinos. That's really interesting. Now I have to ask this question. We're in 2022, and I'm hoping soon we won't have to ask this question. But did your experience over the past 2 years, when we had over the pandemic, did things change? Did you have to adapt the way you work? Did business requirements change? How was the last sort of couple of years played out for you two?
So this situation has affected all of us, and also it was unexpected, so it went by surprise. But we have found that during the last 2 years, more enterprises have turned into mainframe modernization to support business continuity, because the fact I mentioned earlier that companies do not have that many resources that are knowledgeable in COBOL. So the fact that people working remotely and working from home pose an even greater threat for such environments like the ones that have COBOL and microfocus and COBOL environments. So relying on turning on a solution of a modernization like the ones that microfocus and syntax offer has become increasingly has increased in demand. So we've met that we were discussing with customers that were did not take the decision to move forward previously, and they did so. They started such a project during these 2 years, because as a result of this COVID-19 limitations on. So we had an example of one of organizations that the person that was knowledgeable in COBOL was locked out of the country. Could not come back, and he had to support this legacy environment, which is very critical to them. So you do understand that this rang a bell for and we have found out that during the last 2 years, more and more organizations turn to solutions such as the one that we're proposing in order to modernize, and this journey has been expedited as a
interesting. Yeah, it is. I said I hate asking the question just because we talk about it so much, but it is really interesting how organizations, and you've just given a great example of how you've adapted and worked with it and been positive in that sense. I know we've talked a lot around this, but just a sort of one final sort of question. So we've talked a bit about cable being from the 50s and 60s, but it's been proven successful over that time and still is. So how do you bring that proven success to today's modernization projects?
Okay, so while COBOL applications, as I already told you, may seem challenging to a young developer. for most developers actually, and this is mostly due to the environment restrictions of the development environment restrictions that COBOL and the mainframes come with. But with microfocus Visual COBOL, I mean, I've seen it myself, and it allows developers to reuse and repurpose and write new programs based on COBOL. And this is done very, very easily as any other language like C# or Java, you know, that most people utilize and love. I mean, with microfocus, I'm pretty sure that anyone that knows the basics of coding can dive into COBOL. And this is done by integrating COBOL within the industry standard and modern IDEs like Visual Studio, for example, or Eclipse for Java. So this is actually getting a bit more fun, I would say. I mean, yeah, because you write COBOL, that's a language 60 years old, and you write it in a modern way. It's very user-friendly, it's hassle-free. You don't need to worry about syntax errors or typo errors that back then, when you did them, you had no clues that you had an error somewhere in your code. I mean, you had to go and compile it, and a curious error message would come up in your screen, so you had to go and debug it. And oh my God, I mean, debugging an application in a black screen was horrific. I mean, but now it's done through those IDEs and modern runtime environments like .NET or Java. I mean, you can get all the benefits of a modern framework like .NET and Java using COBOL. And of course, you can mix COBOL with other languages within your programs nowadays. I mean, you can be running a COBOL-based application under .NET framework and include C# code within your program. Okay. So this is remarkable. It's, I mean, it's mind-blowing. If you would say that 20 years ago to someone, I don't think he would even believe it. I mean, who would imagine that a code that's been running on systems for 50 years now, it can run on the cloud, let's say. It can run on a serverless, you know, environment and things like that.
Yeah, it's incredible, isn't it? The world continues to change. What's next? I mean, obviously, cloud is now not new. What do you think's coming? With your crystal ball, what's next for COBOL mainframe modernizations? Where do we go after this?
I think modernization is the first step, and what comes next to me is actually expanding all this code base and the business that those COBOL programs do actually, so that businesses will understand in depth of what their code base is doing, because it's a fact that Stefanos already told that there are programs that no one knows what they do, and they exist and they run each day on big enterprises. So once we modernize them and we have a very solid understanding of all the code base and the business, I'm pretty sure that evolvement of this application code base would be the, you know, the next steps to go. And I don't know, you can never predict the future apart from that. I mean, artificial intelligence, deep learning, machine learning, all those things will surely come into picture.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, exactly. We don't know. And as you said earlier, 20 years ago, people wouldn't have predicted what we're doing today. No, thank you for that, Konstantinos. Stefanos, so I think we've sort of come to an end. Is there anything you'd like to add before we say goodbye to the listeners and viewers?
I think we were able to share some light and you know, provide some some insights into, what are the benefits and of doing these modernization journeys, as we call them, rather than projects, because they are a journey. It's I would like to stress once again that it's these are exciting projects for us, because we are we can provide real value to the customer. These projects are very critical, are very important for the customer, and they create a strong bond between us and the customer that allows us to have a long-lasting relationship. I mean, it has been a pivotal point for us. These projects have been the introductory, the introduction to customers for which we have been doing business together for many, many years. So, it's, we're always happy to engage in such projects, because we understand the value that we can bring to the customer, not just removing significant business risks, but also heavily, helping them with the return on investment. So it's a win-win situation for everyone.
Fantastic! What a great point to end on. So thank you very much, Stefanos and Konstantinos from Syntax. It's been wonderful talking to you today. Thank you very much to those of you who have tuned in to this episode, and we'll see you on the next one. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Matt.